interview, whether it's former General Counsel Baker, whether it is Peter Strzok, whether it's Lisa Page. We need to interview everyone who may have access to information, and we need access to all the documents. And frankly, Jason, we've been waiting a long time for it. As you know, I used to work for the Department of Justice, as did Johnny. If I have a bias at all, it is towards them. They need to produce the witnesses and the information. This has taken longer than it should and longer than it needs to.
So, Congressman Ratcliffe, you've been a United States prosecutor, and to use a famous line, what difference does it make? I mean, part of what's happening is the Intel Committee has been looking at the so-called Russia probe, but you're on the Judiciary Committee. The Judiciary Committee has come together with the Oversight Committee, and they're looking at things that have nothing to do with a Russia investigation, but do have things to do with how the Department of Justice has acted. Now, you were in the room, and you and Trey Gowdy were the two that got to actually interview Mr. McCabe. How did that go? Was he forthright? And who do you need to interview next?
Well, Jason, good to be with you. Chairman Gowdy, always a pleasure. Listen, the reason that we had the Deputy Director Andrew McCabe in the room really related to the prior testimony of former Director James Comey. Jason, you and Chairman Gowdy and myself were all in the room when he testified emphatically and unequivocally that the decision to prosecute or not to prosecute Hillary Clinton had been made after her July 2nd interview with the FBI, and then we subsequently learned of a May 2nd memo written by the former Director Comey himself that went through multiple rounds of edits with people at the FBI, where it appears that that decision had in fact been made 2 months before her interview had been conducted. So was those types of decisions that were out of the ordinary at the FBI that really prompted the need for an investigation into these matters, and really what the investigation that you just referenced involving the OGR committee and the Judiciary Committee is really to get answers to those questions that I think the American people have long sought.
So now that you've heard that testimony, Congressman Ratcliffe, who do you need to interview next? Who are you going to bring in to do those transcribed interviews?
Well, ultimately, the interview that took place 2 weeks ago was a confidential interview. I would describe it as a foundational interview with Deputy Director McCabe. It really did ask questions about who, what, when, where, with respect to a lot of these decisions that were made at the FBI and the Department of Justice as well that were out of the ordinary or out of standard protocol. And so really he was able to provide us with a number of answers that will be helpful in identifying the people that we need to talk to. He also was not able to provide substantive answers to some other questions. So we'll continue this process. Ultimately, I think Chairman Gowdy and I agree that we'd like to see former Director Comey come and maybe Attorney General Lynch come in to answer some of these questions, because there's a factual basis to bring them in and give them the opportunity to clear up what appear to be some inconsistencies between the testimony that they've previously given to members of Congress and the documents that have now surfaced.
You know, Congressman Gowdy, one of the things that strikes me about what's happened with the Department of Justice and specifically the FBI is so many abnormalities, things would never, ever happen in any other situation. But you've both been prosecutors. What is different about the investigation that went into Hillary Clinton and the decision, the announcement? What is that laundry list of things that is so different than what normally happens during these investigations?
Well, Jason, let's say at the outset, the difficult facts make for difficult conclusions. And 2016 was a really difficult year for the FBI, and part of that was because of decisions they made, and part of it was because of they're trying to conduct an investigation in the throes of a presidential race. But the short answer to your question is, what was different about the investigation into Secretary Clinton? The answer is almost everything. I'm not interested in litigating their decision not to charge her. Just forget about that. You can like it, you can not like it. No entity is too big to provide oversight over, and the FBI and the Department of Justice are strong enough and venerable enough to withstand scrutiny. So Johnny mentioned one point. If you have made the decision not to charge someone in May of 2016, before you have interviewed 24 witnesses, before you have interviewed the target of the investigation, then you're going to have to explain how you reached that decision not to charge before you ended the investigation. I want to know about the immunity agreements. I want to know why you allow fact witnesses to sit in on witness interviews. I want to know why you wanted those witness interviews to be voluntary. You know, Johnny and every other really good prosecutor knows that you use the grand jury to interview witnesses. You don't let the witness set the ground rules and say, well, I'm going to have these friends and family in the room and we're going to take a break at this time. That's not the way it's done for anyone else in this country. So I want to ask the FBI, did you do things differently in her investigation? And quite frankly, Jason, we already know the answer. The answer is yes. So then we're going to ask, why did you do it differently in her case? And again, I think the Bureau and the Department of Justice are big enough to withstand those questions.
Real quickly to both of you, maybe starting with Congressman Ratcliffe, the integrity of the Department of Justice and the FBI is under attack. What do we need to do to turn that around? What needs to happen internally there to get the confidence of the American people back?
Well, you know, I think part of the problem that we've been looking at here and the people that have created the issues, as Chairman Gowdy has said, it's been a bad 18 months for the Department of Justice and the FBI. Some of the people that made it a really difficult time are gone now. But there are new folks, and really what we've got to do as members of Congress is conduct the oversight necessary to see whether or not they're being effective in restoring the integrity of the Department of Justice. Listen, I think Chairman Gowdy and I agree. We hope that the FBI and DOJ officials like former Director Comey and Attorney General Lynch, we genuinely hope that they have plausible explanations for all of these unprecedented circumstances that Chairman Gowdy just described. We hope that they do, because if they don't, then we really are facing a constitutional crisis. We'd have a situation where the American people will really question the integrity of the FBI and the Department of Justice for decades to come. And so, you know, I really hope that these investigations that we're conducting in our role as congressional oversight can shed some light on that. We're not prosecutors anymore. I'm not accusing anyone of crimes, neither is Chairman Gowdy. But we have an oversight role on behalf of the American people as their elected representatives, and that's what all of these investigations at the congressional level are really about.
No, this country is different because we are self-critical. We do look under the hood and see what's going on. We speak truth to power. My guests are going to stick around, and so should you, because after the break, we're going to look into the future. We'll discuss whether the tax cut is just the start of big things to come for Republicans, or whether the Democrats' resistance can make it a one-hit wonder. Stay tuned with us. Gowdy and Ratcliffe continue on with us after this break. Welcome back. We're rejoined by our guests, Congressman Trey Gowdy and John Ratcliffe of Texas, to discuss the GOP agenda in 2018 and whether the Trump agenda can overcome the Democrats' resistance. Newt Gingrich has a piece out today on FoxNews.com that says, quote, "The great political surprise of 2018 will be the size of the Republican victory," end quote. On the other hand, GOP Congressman Charlie Dent of Pennsylvania is not seeking re-election, and he isn't nearly as optimistic.
We're in a very challenging midterm environment. You know, the party of the president typically, loses about 32 seats in a midterm like this. So I think most of my colleagues are well aware of the historical challenges that we face. Of course, then Donald Trump, complicates that because he's a very polarizing figure. And so I suspect that our challenges will be even greater just because of that.
That from Charlie Dent, current member of Congress on the Republican side of the aisle. Gentlemen, I want to start with Trey Gowdy here. The Speaker of the House also plays a very important role, as does the President. Paul Ryan, as the Speaker of the House, I'm not aware of any Speaker who's ever gone unscathed. He takes on a very difficult position. But Congressman Gowdy, from your perspective, you've got a front and center seat with Paul Ryan. How's he doing? What's your perspective on the Speaker?
Well, Jason, there are a lot of good members of Congress, and my co-guest tonight is one of my favorites. But I'll bet you Johnny would agree with me when I say there is no one better qualified to be the Speaker of the House than Paul Ryan. He has every quality that you want in a leader. He is smart, he is principled, he is inclusive, and most importantly, he is reluctant. He did not want to be the Speaker of the House. He wanted to be the chairperson of Ways and Means. But when Kevin McCarthy dropped out of the Speaker's race, we had no one to turn to. So we went and said, "Will you lead us?" And he reluctantly did so. He is the smartest kid in the class. He would be my #1 draft choice if I were starting this government all over again. I don't know how long he wants to remain Speaker, but he's done us a favor by taking the job. And I can't think of anybody that could do the job as well as he's doing it right now.
Now, Congressman Ratcliffe, a lot of people don't know this about your background, but you're actually the subcommittee chairman on cybersecurity. You, as a former prosecutor, were prosecuting terrorism cases. You look at the $90 billion a year that our federal government spends on cyber and cybersecurity efforts. It is a very dangerous thing in this country. What keeps you up at night as you look at cybersecurity and the challenges facing the United States?
Well, Jason, I think you and Trey have both heard me say this before, that I consider cybersecurity to be the greatest threat to our national security. Listen, I think we are at far greater danger from invasions of our digital borders right now than any invasion of our physical borders. And people just need to turn on their computers, open up their papers every day and see another breach, another hack that has increased in sophistication and severity. And the point is this, that the United States will only remain the world superpower if we're also the world's cyber superpower. And so as much as we're spending in this field right now, it's not enough. It's the great equalizer, cyberspace is right now. It's the new frontier, and it's how a country like North Korea that can't compete with the United States with kinetic firepower can compete with us in cyberspace. So we've got to really dedicate our efforts. This is an area that I've enjoyed legislating in, but we've got to continue to do that in a smart way where we can raise the cyber hygiene and cyber IQ of every American so that we're safer and that we do maintain the status as the world's cyber superpower.
A lot of issues facing the United States, and one of the things that you hear, particularly if you listen to the mainstream media and those outside the Beltway, is the contention, the difficult nature of coming up with bipartisan solutions that you would think that the body doesn't get along. Now, Trey Gowdy, I know you've been writing a book for some time now with Senator Tim Scott, also of South Carolina. Tell me about the book and your perspective on the atmosphere in Washington, D.C.
Well, Jason, Tim Scott is the best person in all of politics. The two guys I'm with tonight are really, really good people, but I think Tim Scott's the best person in politics. And as you two know, because you stopped by our dinner table, he and I are virtually inseparable. We also did not know each other in 2010 when we came in as freshmen. We have different backgrounds. We have different life experiences. We frankly have different views on some pretty significant issues. But we have just chosen to have a friendship some would call unlikely because we are more interested in the conciliation than we are the conflict. So what we want to do is share the story of our relationship and try to encourage our fellow citizens. I do think there is a hunger for conciliation, for unity in this country. Contrast is fine. I'm glad we don't all pull for the Cowboys. I'm glad we don't all go watch the same movie at the same time. But the contrast has morphed into conflict. And what I hear almost everywhere I go is this sense of angst, this divisiveness. We are the United States of America. So I would love for us to spend almost as much time celebrating what we have in common as we do harping on the differences. And Timmy and I look, our hair is different. We come from different backgrounds.
Your hair is different on almost a daily basis. So yeah, that's true.
Yeah, my hair is different from my own hair. Yeah. But if you put up a picture of Tim Scott, you can see we have differences. But we made a conscious effort to celebrate the things that we have in common. And Jason, I'm telling you, you served there, whether it's Joey Kennedy or Seth Moulton or Kristen Sinema or Tulsi Gabbard or Peter Welch. Those are all Democrats on the other side of the aisle. I know this story doesn't get out, and some of your viewers and some of the viewers of other television shows, frankly, don't want to hear it. But 99.9% of us get along really well in our personal interactions. It's just we have this hyper focus on conflict in this country. So the fact that we get along doesn't make the news. What does make the news is if there's one member on either side yelling at each other that night. So I'm interested in conciliation and unity and what binds us together as fellow Americans, and that's what Timmy and I want to write about.
Well, listen, it's been an honor and privilege to serve with you. Well, I did in the United States Congress. Parting quick word, John Ratcliffe, I don't know if you have any sort of New Year's resolution or good movie that you saw or some word of wisdom going into the new year, but...
Well, my New Year's resolution, one of the things that Chairman Gowdy's always telling me is that I should ask better questions of witnesses at congressional hearings. And since he's a lot older and wiser, mostly older, I'm going to take that advice to heart in 2018.
Trey, Gowdy, do you have any words of wisdom going into 2018, or any good movie or show that you saw or that provides some inspiration?
Well, I want to say this. I want to wish you and Julie a Happy New Year. And Johnny, I want to wish you and Michelle a Happy New Year. And Jason, it was a privilege to serve with you. And Johnny, you know that you are my favorite member of the House. In terms of holiday movies, one that I have found inspirational this season is Narcos, Season 3. If you like movies about families and family businesses, I would recommend Narcos.
Yeah, that's a feel-good, pick-me-up, way to get along movie. Yeah, rather long one.
I thought he was going to say Bad Santa, but okay.
Gentlemen,
no, my wife
you.
will not let me watch Bad Santa.
Thank you again very much. One big battle next year is sure to be fought is over immigration, and both Gowdy and Ratcliffe will be there. But a pair of Democratic governors, they're not waiting. A new strategy to flout the president is taking hold, and that's next. Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. I'm Jason Chaffetz in for Laura Ingraham. Democratic governors seem to be trying to top one another, flouting immigration law and aiming to antagonizing President Trump. Their latest craze, granting pardons to immigrants convicted of crimes to try to save them from deportation. California Governor Jerry Brown pardoned 2 on Saturday, and now New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is following suit, pardoning 18 immigrants convicted of crimes. Joining me to debate the wisdom of these pardons are Democratic strategist Jose Aristimuño and constitutional law professor John Eastman of Chapman College in Los Angeles, California. Gentlemen, Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us here. Jose, I want to start with you. Help me understand the rationale. We're talking about people that are the criminal element, people involved in gangs, people that are committing crimes. Why are people bending over backwards to make sure that they stay here instead of saying, look, I understand the fight for what you want to do with Dreamers and others, but the criminal element, isn't that something that Republicans, Democrats, everybody on the political spectrum can agree those are the people that should not be in the United States?
Look, I think one thing we ought to sort of take a close look at is this. If you're an immigrant if you're an undocumented immigrant who've committed high level crimes, we want you out of this country, okay? If you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, we want you out of this country. Now, there's 18 people who the governor of New York just pardoned are people who've committed, first and foremost, low-level offenses. They've committed crimes over 10 years ago, and they have now been able to sort of reinstate themselves into society. What these governors are doing, Jason...
But they reinstated themselves into the country and then committed crimes. And what I don't understand is we're not talking about a petty, oh, I accidentally jaywalked or I was going 45 and a 35. These are crimes against other people in which they're convicted.
We're a compassionate country. The symbol of the United States has always been the Statue of Liberty, not a border wall that our current president's trying to sort of amplify. If we want to fix this for once and for all, we need to pass immigration reform. That includes securing the country, but also providing a path to citizenship for the millions of immigrants who all they want is to pay allegiance to our flag.
All right, Professor, you've heard this argument. You've heard it before. What is the other side of that says, no, we should not be prioritizing what's going on with people who are there committing crimes?
That's right. These folks were already on a path to citizenship, and they blew it. They committed crimes. There's a list of crimes that if you commit, it makes you deportable, even if you were otherwise lawfully present in the United States. Things like human trafficking and drugs and weapons charges, sexual assault and battery, and a number of these crimes, even if you get the pardon, you're still deportable. And that's what's the most interesting part of this story that's largely gone unremarked so far, is the folks that Governor Brown pardoned and Governor Cuomo pardoned yesterday. None of them, as far as I can tell, are eligible to be removed from the deportation procedures because of the pardon, because they committed crimes that were not eligible for the pardon exception.
So let's make sure we got this crystal clear. You can get a pardon from a governor, but that doesn't excuse you from federal deportation, right? The governors don't have a say in that, do they?
It does on a couple of crimes. The federal statute sets out a couple of crimes where the pardon will block the deportation. But from the information I've been able to gather over the last day, the individuals that Governor Brown and Governor Cuomo pardoned do not fit those crimes. They've engaged in other crimes, carjacking and drug offenses and gun offenses, and one of them even facilitating human trafficking. Those are not the kind of crimes that when you get pardoned from, that they take you out of the deportation system. So these folks are still eligible for deportation, which means that these two governors are just showboating to try and make a political or rhetorical point or a media point rather than actually paying attention to what the law is.
Jose, what's your reaction to that?
Look, the point here is that if we want to fix this, we need to pass comprehensive immigration reform. A majority of Americans want that. That's what they want. They want a solution to the problem.
Okay, but there are people, and I was one of them in Congress, that are just not going to vote in favor of amnesty. There are a lot of things we probably can't agree on, but amnesty, now, and again, I'm not there, but I couldn't agree to that. But what is the argument? We're talking about the criminal element. People who are involved in gangs. One of them was supposedly involved in gun crime. Why?
Many years ago, we're talking about over a decade ago. Now, if you want to talk about amnesty, if we want to talk about amnesty,
if they were convicted.
Now, let me say this: if you want to talk about amnesty, what we have right now in this country is amnesty, doing nothing about it. We are keeping over 11 million immigrants in a shadow economy. Right? That is true amnesty. We got to do something about it.
You speak a lot of truth to that point. But what is the argument that says, if you're here, I don't care if it was 10 years ago or if it was 10 minutes ago, if you're here and you're on a pathway to citizenship or you're here illegally and you commit a crime, why are we not just booting you out? And I would think that the responsible communities would actually support that notion.
We are not a divided country. We are a compassionate country. I'm going to say that again. The symbol of our country is the Statue of Liberty. We need to play by that. We have values as Americans. These people are people. Some of them. There's one of them who helped out after 9/11. Who, there are people who volunteered. I mean,
I got the. Hey, they're good people. But I'm just talking about people convicted of a crime. They've gone before a judge. The judge has made a ruling. Professor, I'm going to let you have the last word. What do you see happening? What is going to happen in this case under the law?
Well, I think they're going to get these matters in before a couple of courts that might well say that the pardon interferes with the deportation proceeding. Those courts would be wrong, and I think ultimately they'll be overturned on appeal or by the Supreme Court because the statute's very clear here. Certain crimes, you get deported based upon the conviction, whether you're subsequently pardoned or not. The statute couldn't be more clear on that fact. And the Ninth Circuit, one of the most liberal courts in the country, has even upheld that statute before. So I think at the end of the day, if the administration proceeds with these deportations, that effort is going to be upheld.
Gentlemen, thank you. I wish we had more time for this, but Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us. More trouble is brewing for President Trump overseas. He's not very happy with the president of China tonight, even though he says they are great friends. We'll dive into that next. And later, the very uncivil war that's broken out after the left, after a Vanity Fair magazine dares to make fun of Hillary Clinton. You want to hear what President Trump had to say about it. Up next. President Trump is steamed with China following a report it has been secretly selling oil to North Korea in violations of United Nations sanctions. A South Korean paper published what it said were U.S. spy satellite photos showing Chinese ships delivering oil to North Korean ships at sea. President Trump tweeted today, quote, "Caught red-handed, very disappointed that China is allowing oil to go into North Korea. There will never be a friendly solution to the North Korean problem if this continues to happen," end quote. And tonight, in an interview with the New York Times, the president says he's, quote, "been soft," end quote, on China over trade in hopes that its government will pressure North Korea to abandon its nuclear weapons program. Let's discuss the implications with Fox News national security and foreign affairs analyst Waleed Fares in Orlando, Florida. And joining us from San Francisco, California is attorney and foreign policy analyst Ari Aramish. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us. You've both been outspoken on a number of foreign policy issues. But Ari, let me start with you. The president, he had a pretty good year on foreign policy for a rookie, don't you think?
Did he? I think not. No, the president has had a number of major fiascos. First and foremost, let me start by saying this. Our allies are worried about us, and our enemies
which ally do you
us.
think is worried about it? Which ally do you think is worried
Germany, the United Kingdom. Germany's Angela Merkel, who the president would not even shake her hand at the White House. The British, where we now have a debate whether the president is even invited to a wedding, to a royal wedding for Prince Harry. And
That's
now
your
we have
biggest
to second
worry.
guess
President
whether
Trump hasn't been invited to a presidential to a wedding.
Jason, that is not my concern.
Let me try to go to China.
No, Jason, hold on, Jason. My concern.
Let's go to China.
No, I did bring it up, so let me finish the point, Jason. Jason, my concern is that America is no longer respected under Donald J. Trump. That is my problem.
Okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I happen to disagree with that, but let's talk about China for a second. I want to talk about China and North Korea because it is a very difficult proposition. Here we have spy satellite photos reportedly out showing that North Korea is in China are trading fuel on a ship. Let's go to Dr. Ferris. What do you make of this and what the president's approach has been, particularly as it relates to North Korea?
Well, we have, first of all, the daily approach that basically generates debates about what we see, what we don't see, the pictures, the photos, and then you have the strategic approach. And the strategic approach, basically, the novelty of the Trump administration is that the Eastern Asian alliance is back and running. That's the most important point. Japan, South Korea, other players, we've seen this in his Asian tour, and that is sending basically strong signals to China, the deployment of task forces, which has generated, Congressman, a unanimous vote of the Security Council, including China and Russia, and of course our other allies, against North Korea, on the one hand. On the other hand, yes, the Chinese are not yet completely convinced that they got to move 100% in this issue. They don't know. They don't have answers on if that regime collapses in North Korea, who will replace him? 100% pro-Chinese, neutral? Will be South Korea. So I think there will be more diplomatic work with China on the one hand, but on the ground in the East Asian alliance, I think it's very clear that there's a pressure coming from that side.
Okay, so Ari, there was a strong vote, you've got to admit, in the United Nations where they made a pretty strong statement. Nikki Haley, I got to admit, it did a pretty good job of helping to bring people along. But given the spy satellite photos that you see here, given the situation that we're in today, what do you recommend?
Jason,
what do you think that the president should be doing in this particular case?
Jason, if you don't cut me off or interrupt me for 30 seconds, and I promise you not to wipe the floor with anybody, but give me 30 seconds. Here's a problem.
Okay, well,
we have a unanimous vote. We have a unanimous vote in the UN Security Council. That is because North Korea is an international pariah, first and foremost. But let Tillerson be Tillerson. Let him do his job. The president can't wake up every morning and tweet nonsense. The president can't wake up every morning after planning his golf game and after planning his little vacations, cannot mishandle and misinterpret and ignore intelligence reports and intelligence briefings and so on and so forth.
What specifically do you think he's not? No, what do you specifically think he should be doing, given this current satellite photos? You're looking at them like we are today. What do you think the president should be doing at this point?
Well, the president, for the first and foremost, the president should have not endeared the Chinese when he shared some chocolate cake with them in Mar-a-Lago. And secondly, he should turn up the heat on the Chinese. The Chinese have more leverage on the North Koreans than anybody in the region or in the world for that matter. Third, he should ignore the calls coming from Russia and from Sergei Lavrov, that's a Russian foreign minister, to try to mediate between the U.S. and North Korea. This is not a U.S.-North Korea problem. This is a North Korea versus the rest of the world problem.
Okay,
Bottom line is this: the president.
Sorry,
hold on, Jason.
No. I'm sorry, but we
you got
have
to
very
allocate
limited
time fairly.
I did.
You were the chairman of the Oversight Committee.
Yes,
this is
very
not the
insightful.
committee. You got to allocate time fairly.
No,
you got to allocate time fairly. You know, and you're sitting
just
there in New York. You
filibustering
got to
and
allocate
wasting
time fairly.
Dr. Ferris.
Good luck. Go run it.
Thank you, Dr. Ferris. Tell me what you think the president should be doing in this particular case.
Well, first of all, he is doing, and we cannot rely on one evening news report about what the Chinese are doing only. This is the Chinese talking to President Trump and his administration, but he's talking to them as well. What do you think the Chinese war room, or for that matter, the North Korean war rooms, are looking at his tweets in the morning? No, they're looking at the movement of the task forces that are being operational in those areas. They're looking at the joint exercise between Japan, South Korea, and of course, they're looking at the growth of that international coalition that wants to isolate North Korea. China today is not China of the 50s. They have financial interests around the world, and the action is around the world. It's not just what's happening between China and the United States bilaterally, but also internationally as well. So I recommend patience.
And they play Trump for a fool.
Okay.
Waleed, and they play Trump for a fool.
I gotta leave it there. I gotta leave it there. I'm gonna try to wish you.
They play Trump for a fool.
I'm gonna try to wish you a happy New Year. When we come back in a minute, we'll be looking at an extremely powerful part of the government you may have heard very little about until tonight. Stay tuned. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Ingraham Angle. I'm Jason Chaffetz, in for Laura Ingraham. We've heard a lot about this year about special prosecutors, independent counsels, and congressional investigations, but we don't hear so much about inspectors general, who play a huge and critical important role in the oversight of your government. There are 72 inspectors general, and they have an enormous staff of about 13,500 employees. Joining me now to discuss his role and duties is Michael Missel from the Department of Veterans Affairs, where he is the Inspector General. Inspector General, I want to thank you. First of all, the community as a whole. People, I think, do think, oh, we need a special prosecutor, particularly when it relates to the FBI and the Department of Justice. But behind the scenes, we already have embedded into the system. People are essentially, they're auditors, right? What can they look at? What can they not look at? And what do we expect the 850 people you employ at the Veterans Administration to do on a daily basis?
So what our job is to do oversight of the programs and operations of the agency. We do that by conducting audits, inspections, reviews, and criminal investigations. And what we're really looking for is fraud, waste, abuse, and inefficiencies. So we use our powers to get whatever information we want from the agency, to talk to whatever person at the agency.
Do they have to respond to you? If you come in with the Inspector General badge and say, I'm here to talk to you, I need those documents, do they have to give them to you?
They have to give them to us, absolutely, and they do.
The only thing that they can't do, though, is once they leave and they depart, then you don't have the ability to reach out and go get that information.
We can still subpoena them for information, documents, but correct, we do not have the ability to subpoena a former employee to talk to us.
So just to give viewers at home a sense at the VA, you go to the website. By the way, if you go to @oversight.gov, this is the Twitter handle. It's brand new with all these investigations, all these reports about what's going on in your government. Oversight.gov is also a website that the viewers at home can go to. But just at the VA, you issued 181 reports, 1,144 recommendations, and had a $4.2 billion impact. What you're looking at the VA, I mean, we all care about veterans that have served this nation. It seems like a disaster and a mess. Where is the VA at today, and what are your biggest concerns?
Well, we're working very hard to fix whatever issues we find. We have a hotline that gets 40,000 contacts a year. Wow. So we triage every one of those contacts. We hear from veterans. We hear from VA employees. We hear from whistleblowers. We're really critical to us.
But what's not working well at the VA today? I mean, there has been bills that have been passed in this Congress. President Trump has made it a priority. But today, as the Inspector General looking under the hood, what is your biggest concern at the VA?
We're just making sure that the programs work as they're designed and that the money is spent as appropriated. So we've looked, as you pointed out, we made a number of recommendations, and hopefully that means those programs are going to be improved. And then we're always finding other things. We look very hard. We have a very proud staff that works every day to help make the programs and operations better for veterans.
Waste, fraud, and abuse. We all talk about, every year, people talk about wanting to root out the waste, fraud, and abuse. Have you been able to pin a number on that? How big is the waste, fraud, and abuse?
It's extremely large.
Well, like, is that hundreds of dollars? Is it tens of billions of dollars?
It's in the billions of dollars. Just in the last 6 months, our economic impact was over $10 billion, and that's in cost savings, that's in recoveries we had, and other ways we measure economic impact. So
what's the number one thing you want people to know about inspectors general? Because particularly over at the Department of Justice, A lot of calls for a special prosecutor, but do you really need a special prosecutor if you have an inspector general like Michael Horowitz doing their job over there?
I think one of the differentiating features about an inspector general is our independence. We don't report to anybody. We don't report to the head of the agency. We don't report to Congress. So this allows us to do our job the way we think the best way possible. It allows us to call it like we see it, to do our job in a fair and objective manner, and to get things right.
Well, look,